Government steps in to save them. Farmers have no one to turn to but God.
Farmers, in my opinion, dear Lord, and it's only my opinion, are closer to thee than anyone else on this earth.
You support an alleged pedophile.
So Nepal issued a tweet on site.
Nous exigeons à l'État congolais au niveau de Kinshasa le départ du général Gassita. Et là, je dois préciser parce que nous sommes en train de vivre beaucoup de rumeurs qui circulent selon lesquelles Gassita est refusé à Uvira et à Fizi par la simple raison qu'il est Mnyamulenge. Je dois donner des précisions, non. On refuse le général Gassita parce que tout simplement, il est parmi les commandants qui avaient abandonné des zones stratégiques, des zones stratégiques du Sud Kivu. Nous l'avons fait avec Yav, nous l'avons fait avec Gervais et nous allons continuer avec les autres. Nous n'avons pas confiance de tous ces commandants qui avaient abandonné les localités stratégiques au mai 2023.
So what you're seeing is three different nations that are responding to their government in three different ways, completely different than the United States. So in France, what's going on is that basically France's parliament has not been able to get past a budget. So you know how in the United States they signed the big beautiful bill? Well, they haven't signed anything in France, and they've gone through 4 prime ministers now, and they've gotten on to their 5th in being unable to do this. And because of this, when you don't sign a budget, you don't allocate the funds that people have paid with their taxes to actually run the government. Not allocating those funds puts a stop on not only people being paid to actually work in the government, but it also stops, the grants being given, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is because they're saying that France is in such severe debt that its economy is about to bottom out. Now, what came out of this is a whole movement. All right. The Block Everything movement was born online over the summer, and it started in far right circles, but then it was co-opted by labor unions, united by a common frustration with what they see as a broken political system. So basically, even though they were on the left and the right, everybody was like, this still ain't it. Basically, France said, we don't know what to do. And they said, no, sorry, France's parliament said, we don't know what to do. And the people said, oh, we'll show you. We'll show you what to do. Okay. Now, the socialists who are a part of the parliament have offered a counter budget that would impose a tax of at least 2% on personal wealth greater than 100 million euros. And it would generate savings of 22 billion euros. This proposal would be tough to marry with the pro-business reform agenda of Macron's presidency because, of course, Macron is a bleeding heart capitalist who's also a huge racist and said that Africa should be thanking France for what they've done for them. Get the hell out of here. Side note, someone asked about my book. I'm going to release the book as an ebook, a physical book, and an audio book. Now, what's going on in Nepal is that you have the young generation. They're calling it the Gen Z uprising because the people of Nepal are like, yo, you are not going to try and shut us down. And there was a protest that ended up becoming violent when a police officer when police killed like 19,000 people. I'm sorry, when the police killed 19 people in the protests. Then they said, oh, you trying to shoot people? Oh, this is what we about to do. So their prime minister, he stepped down. They turned everything upside down. They burned his palace. They threw members of the parliament in the river. They say, we not playing with y'all. We're not playing with y'all. In the Congo, what they're talking about is that there was like a mayor type person in the Congo who basically did not help the people when the militias came in to harm them. They ran off and was trying to stay protected. And they said, oh, word? All right. You trying to do that? You trying to leave us here to take the L? And then you're going to try and take up space and safety and refuge with them? Nah. Bump that. And anybody else who does that, we coming to get you out of your crib too. So when we see all of these different examples in other countries, we ask ourselves, where is the American rage? Now, I don't think enough people are really willing to have the very literal conversation of the effects of brainwashing on the American society. We have seen, looking at Israel, how brainwashing can be effective, right? You have an entire society that repeats harmful rhetoric that exists in a pathological, sociopathic way. And this has been trained since the onset of their childhood. They have never existed outside of this. I would be curious to find out how many of the folks that have become anti-Zionists are neurodivergent. I would be really curious because one of the hallmarks of the neurodivergent brain is it is harder to indoctrinate. It's harder to fall into these methods of control that are continuously supplanted on the people. When we're looking at farmers in Oklahoma who are praying, that's how they're handling their situation of possibly losing their farms to the administration they overwhelmingly paid for. They are paying. I mean, they are praying. So what that says to me is you do not feel like you are physically or mentally or emotionally capable of demanding from the people who are doing this to you. How is that possible? Why are you praying to God when these people are the ones who did it? We have to talk about the Democrats when we ask, where is the American rage? So many of you all have heard about the term, why is this, my brain, not organized opposition, but what is, I'll put it in a question form. What is the term that so many people associate with the Democrats in their continuously being obstacles to progression? Controlled opposition. Thank you all. Thank you, Sarah. Controlled opposition. Now, controlled opposition is an oxymoron, isn't it? Because controlled opposition says we're only going to allow opposition within a particular framework, which brings us back to the Overton window that our good friend Logan was referring to earlier on the show. There is a certain framework of acceptable opposition, but anything beyond that becomes problematic. Now, we see that in how we look at folks who are resistance fighters, right? Somehow the H group in Palestine are not resistance fighters, they are terrorists. But when we see resistance fighters in these other places all over the world that genocide has taken place, they're now called resistance fighters in hindsight. The ANC, Nelson Mandela, they were resistance fighters. They weren't doing anything different in terms of their efforts, in terms of their, their mandate, different than H group. So when we talk about the Democrats, they are controlled opposition. They oppose only to a certain extent, and anything beyond that is seen as anti-fat, is seen as Antifa, right? Or is seen as socialism or communism. It's the reason why we see the language for defund the police shifted. This type of controlled opposition is what allows for administrations like the Trump administration to do what they do. So when we are looking at these other countries and we're seeing the way they're responding, one of the other things we can acknowledge is that, yes, the United States has far more military might than Nepal, right? Than the Congo, and than France. What we can also acknowledge, though, is that the United States has more people who are in the same situation, who have more money, and who have more access to resources. So it ends up, in my opinion, balancing out. And when we say, where is the American rage? I literally mean that. Why aren't more people actually angry at what's taking place? Why aren't more people feeling like they have been done dirty? And it's because, once again, they are internalizing that there is something they could have done. For the fact that there are so many people that are continuously trying to convince me that I am responsible, even partially, for what is happening in the United States with the fascist government, that lets you know that those people who are accusing me of having that individual capability, baby, they think that they have those individual responsibilities. No. There's a certain amount of individualism. There's a certain amount of individualism that is applied to your accountability and your responsibility. However, there are entire infrastructures in place to prevent your advancement. That doesn't make you a victim. That makes you an American. And those infrastructures that are in place will not move if you continue to uphold anything that keeps them in place. And this is why you have people that are talking about all different methods of protest and resistance, whether it's checking your consumerism, whether it's aligning communally, whether it's addressing electoral politics and taking the bottom out from that, whether it's going and running up in these buildings and challenging these folks face to face on what are you actually doing. All of these things, multi-pronged approach, prop up the America that people are too afraid to lose. That's why there is no rage, because they're trying to hold on to something that actually doesn't even have value. And the thing is, they're not even doing their best to hold on to it. They're holding on to a memory. Holding back the tears. They're holding on to a fantasy, not a memory, a fantasy. So please tell me in the comments, why do you feel that there is a lack of American rage? Garden Labyrinth says, maybe most USA in this time don't believe change is possible since even civil rights actions were in their grandparents' youth. Delisa says they don't want to acknowledge or admit it because they voted for it. Hema says, because we have normalized being okay with seeing others suffer as long as it's not me and mine. Nadaleje says, in the USA, folks ask for a permit to protest. Oh my, it's like, what? SMH, from what I gather, folks in other countries don't wait for permission to protest. You better say that. Pamela says, literally talked to my dad a couple months ago about things that are happening, and he wasn't even fully aware. Controlled ops. Melissa Dunmore says, great question. I think American rage is subsumed by the lack of American resilience. It's that access to resources and delusion of superiority that keeps people sat the hell down when they ought to stand up. Agreed. Hans St. Louis says, because most of these cowards are so racist, they'll rather destroy a nation than acknowledge what us blacks have been fighting and warning them about. You ain't never lie. They would rather burn the world and rule over its ashes. Rolando says, most Americans have never seen war. They feel like they're immune to violence and other assorted BS. That is a fact. That is a fact. I mean, this is one take on K-pop Demon Hunters. I did not receive this from it, but okay. Nia says, because we have become complacent with materials, because we've been complacent with material things that are ultimately distractions. Scarlett says, fear of losing our own wealth, even if it's small things, pension, etc. Revolution is uncomfortable. Revolution is uncomfortable, which is why Cynthia follows up fear and comfort. We are fearful of what would happen if we truly rise up, and my immediate circle of people I know hold tight to their comfortable homes. So I want you all to think about, what would it take? What do you think it would take to incite American rage? What would American rage look like? We've seen what French rage looks like. We've seen what Nepalese rage looks like. We've seen what Indonesian rage looks like over the past few weeks, Kenyan rage. We've seen what Congolese rage looks like. What does American rage look like to you all? I'm waiting for y'all to get some answers in here in the chat. Lester says war. Just 3 letters. War. All right. Hema says Karen and friends talking to the White House manager. Okay. RD said Second Amendment meets ICE. Smiley face. Moment with Mel says storming the Capitol. Adrian says, I don't think I've ever seen American rage. Rolando says Teen Spirit. That's me. Chirimacha 1025 says it would look like January 6th, but with the correct political motivations. Isabel says American rage is bottled up, and then it eventually pops off. Melissa adds guns, 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 and segregated strongholds. That sounds pretty accurate. Lizzie Pickles, what I'm saying is that they killed 19 people, and that's what popped it off. Globalize the Intifada says awareness, Rayan. More people need to be aware that the bubble will pop. The bubble will pop. American rage is a doozy. And I asked you all also, like, what do we think will get the doozy going? Reese says, I think the trigger is ultimately centered on the economics and ultimately the disintegration of the classes. I agree. And an entire loss of prospects will push people over the edge. Apparently, Barron just moved back into the White House, which if that's not symbolic of what this country's on, I don't know what is. Kelsey says, when guns are banned and gas is at $7 in the South. Whew, child. Say that. D. Williams says, I think that American rage will look like what we just saw in Chicago, but across the nation. What did we just see in Chicago? Yes, I'm Troy says, we don't do rage well because so much of what we get mad about is manufactured. When we are confronted by truth, a good number of us fall apart. Five Fight says, I think the trigger will be no more food on store shelves because ICE raids and empty trucker seats. Well, continue to think about this. You know, that's what our critical thinking exercise is about. Not just having the conversation here, but having it after the show. By the way, we will be continuing with our after the show Patreon after show. By $5, with $5, you can subscribe to Patreon and join us after the show for the combo.
Amen.